All right. Good evening. I guess that's what I want to call it. It is Monday at 7 o'clock p.m. My name is Andre Anderson. I am both host and founder of this wonderful company called BSTL. And of course, by now you should know that it stands for Building Something That Lasts. I hope you're keeping well. Yes, I know it's been a little bit rainy, but the weather is going to get better. I am certain of that as we turn the corner into May. It's going to be all right. So I hope you're keeping well, and I hope that everything is well on your end. And of course, I just want to thank you again for joining us. And if you haven't done so yet, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. This way we can keep this conversation going. So today I'm excited. I really am. I'm excited. Of course, before we log on to this thing, there's always like a pre-conversation that happens, and I have met a wonderful voice over the phone. Her name is Debra Coles. She is an ICU nurse at Markham Stouffville Hospital, and I wish I would have recorded everything that we talked about before we began recording for this conversation, but I didn't do so. I think you're really going to love her almost immediately because she sounds like such a fabulous person, and we are going to have to meet face to face one of these days. So, Deborah, welcome, welcome.
Thank, thank you very much for inviting me onto the program this morning. It's absolutely my pleasure.
So, Deborah, I'm sure that there are a lot of people that know you. I mean, you work in the ICU, which is very intensive, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people that come in and out of the
Mhm.
ICU. But there's got to be something about you that you would like to share before we get into our conversation today. Maybe you could just tell our listeners.
Andre, I've been a critical care nurse all of my life, and it's interesting how, as I think every person always wonders what their purpose is. I think that as we age, we always wonder, you know, did I make a difference? What was my purpose of my job or whatever my life's what was my destiny? And it's interesting as I'm reflecting, over my career over the last 35 years, I've never questioned this. I knew immediately once I was sent to the ICU, and believe me, I was working on another floor and my floor closed, and
Oh,
all the nurses wanted to sign up for babies, and they said,
mm,
"Oh no, you're going to the ICU." And I went, "I can't go there.
right.
How could I go there? I don't know anything."
Yeah,
But it was interesting that, whatever you believe, the higher power,
yeah.
there was a reason. And I knew within about a week and a half of, working in that environment that that's where I was supposed to work. And I've never questioned it for a day. I know that this has been my life's purpose to work in a critical care environment and to hopefully have made a difference.
You know,
So,
I like the way that you put that because I think calling and purpose
mhm.
are the central points of life. And I think that a lot of people at times they struggle in life, not because they're not productive, but they may be productive in the wrong space. So good on
Correct.
you that you figured that out early in your career. And, after all of these years of being in critical care, you still have that thing in your voice that says that you still wake up. And I'm sure that there are some down days. There have to be if you're working in ICU, but it sounds like you still have that twinkle in your voice that says, I'm still here because this is what I want to do.
Well, I mean, uh, for me right now, where I'm at in my personal journey, I am thinking of what the next steps will be. I
Mm,
think everyone always wants to stay challenged and engaged, and
hmm.
I've done this a really long time, and I think I'm ready for a new chapter. I
Okay.
don't know exactly what that will look like or what the gifts that I have
Hmm.
will translate into something else, but I'm hopeful. But when I do go to work, there are certain moments, Andre, that I was sharing with you, just this morning,
Yeah.
that on Sunday I was working, and I was very privileged to know exactly why I was there that morning. I wasn't booked to work,
Ah.
but I
Hmm.
was called into work, and the moment that I arrived and had sort of understood what the assignment was going to be, and the family, and I knew in that moment, ah, I know why I'm here.
Ah. Yeah.
And it is that. profound knowing that sometimes for me, I know that perhaps I can't help the patient, that,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your beliefs are, if they're going to pass or, they're going to go home or this is the end of their days.
Yes.
But perhaps I was sent to help a family,
Yes.
to understand and stand simply in that gap
Mm-hmm.
of, the fear of, because it's frightening. It is,
Mm-hmm.
of not knowing what is this going to look like and being able to share what this is going to happen or what it will look like or I'm going to be with you and you're not going to be alone and it's going to be quiet
Yeah.
or whatever it's going to look like. And I think that was, my role on certain days. I understand completely why I'm supposed to be there.
And you know what's interesting? Because, of course, on this particular podcast, we talk about leadership, right? That's our
Mm-hmm.
primary objective here. And the truth
Right,
is, in your capacity as a healthcare worker, administrator, and all of the different hats that go along with what you do, the truth
right,
is leadership is so key, especially when you are in a space where really words matter, how you execute matters. All of those things are paramount because you're not dealing with a case study. You're dealing with a family and an individual who may be at the end of their life, and you've got to find a way to be a professional, and yet there's an art and science that goes along with what you do. So, of course, today we're going to be
mm-hmm.
talking about turning some of these losses into gains, right? Because uh,
Exactly.
going through this pandemic, and maybe you want to start there, there have been a lot of people that came in there that were young, they were middle-aged, they were a little bit older, and the reality is some of them left there, scars and bruises, and then some of them, they didn't. And there you
Correct.
are in the middle of that, Deborah, walking people through. So maybe let's start there.
Well, I've always thought of myself sort of as a guide, and I don't know why that word just spoke to me. And if I'm there to mentor, the new staff that is coming on into this environment, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of I think leadership is um, mentoring, and I agree with
Mm-hmm.
you completely about words matter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the tone of the words. Sometimes some of the greatest things I've said has been in silence, is
Mm.
just simply standing with someone,
Yeah.
and I think it's understanding what, as a leader or as a mentor, what
Mm-hmm.
that person needs, and sometimes it's just simply standing in the energy, and so they're not alone, or it's modeling behavior or modeling what I would say or do in that particular situation. And you're right, it is frightening. A lot of staff come thinking, and I've had several, junior nurses say to me, I didn't realize, I thought I was going to save everyone here. And I said, unfortunately, love, a lot of people do pass away
Yeah.
in an intensive care, but it's how that looks
Mm-hmm.
for me, if it's with grace. And I
Yeah.
remember as a very new nurse, I was sitting with my grandmother, and I don't know why, and she was just asked me, just very randomly at her kitchen table, how was school going, and what was I frightened of?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, what an interesting question to ask, um, in any role that you're in. Isn't it interesting to suddenly look at someone that is employed with you and saying, is there an area that you're struggling or that you might be
Mm.
frightened, that I might be able to share something with? And my
Yes.
grandmother said, I said to her, well, I'm really worried that someone might die. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, well, you've really picked the wrong job. And I went,
Yeah.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And then she just looked at me, Andre, with this sense of calm, and she just said, but remember, Deborah, that they're going to see people they haven't seen in a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me such peace.
Mm-hmm.
And in a month's time, my grandmother passed away.
Wow.
And quintessentially, it was her words, I think, that was able to hold me up when I didn't think I was going to get through to the next moment.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we were talking, and I like to, a lot of young staff, and they're frightened.
Mm-hmm.
And either they've never had a death in their family. So
Mm-hmm.
this is very challenging for them to be placed in a role where now they're trying to walk through really a life moment
Yes.
with really no experience
Yes.
personally.
And it
So
and
if
it changes you, right? And I'm sorry to interrupt you,
it
but
absolutely changes you.
it changes you from the perspective of once you
Mm-hmm.
have gotten, and I hope you don't mind the phrase, that first death
Yes.
under your belt,
Mm-hmm.
you're never the same. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Never the same. And for me, it's sharing stories of other. I've been very privileged to be, to stand there when someone has transitioned over,
Hmm.
and it's just this. I always say to families, "Do you feel like there's someone here?"
Hmm.
And sometimes they look at me like, "Well, yes, but I thought I was crazy." And I said, "No,
Hmm.
they never go alone, Andre. Someone
Hmm.
always comes, is what I know."
Hmm.
And, for me, having the ability to maybe share some of these stories of, patients who I hope will allow these staff not to be paralyzed in that moment, to find
Hmm.
a word. Perhaps it's something that I may have shared with them.
Hmm.
I will just very quickly, I had a patient, this may speak to you as well as,
Hmm.
um, but I had a patient who basically arrested in front of me, and I remember I was so frightened. I yelled at her, and I said,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, please don't die!"
Wow. Yeah.
And for all intents and purposes, she really wasn't there. So I always say to people, please, please talk.
Hmm.
Hearing is the last sense to go,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's just, please, please go in and say what's on your heart.
Hmm.
I believe in my soul they
Hmm.
hear you.
Hmm.
So this lady ended up getting better and going home. And then she came back, and we were sitting one morning or one night at 3 in the morning, and I made her tea. And she looked at me and she said, Debra, I died. And I said,
Hmm.
yes, I was there.
Hmm.
And she goes, she remembered, Andre, all of it.
Wow.
And she said, I remember going, and it was beautiful. And you
Hmm.
would hear these stories. She goes, it was this beautiful green and it was sunny. And she goes, all of a sudden, my dog was there. And I said, oh my goodness, the dogs go to heaven? She goes, yes. I was like, oh, I'm so excited.
Hmm.
Then she said, my daughter came over the hill, and her daughter had passed when she was 18.
Hmm.
And then her husband came over,
Hmm.
and she was like so excited to see them all. And finally, her husband looked at her and said, you can't be here.
Hmm.
And she said, but, well, nice to see you too. I haven't been here. Like, I haven't seen you in like
Yeah.
20 years.
Right.
And she said, I'm arguing with him.
Hmm.
And she said, there was so much love.
Yes.
And he looked at her and said, we're having a grandbaby,
Hmm.
and you have to go back.
Wow.
And I can't. And I want the baby to know us.
Wow.
They have to know. And in that moment, we got a heartbeat back. And she came back.
Hmm.
She lived for 3 years.
Hmm.
She knew exactly where she was going. She honored her troth. She told her husband she would come back. She met the baby. And there was such a knowing and a peace that just surpassed understanding from this woman. And that, for me, I have used
Hmm.
in my practice to share with people, saying, you're not going to go alone. There is someone waiting. There is love. They do hear you.
So let me ask you this question, Deborah. And by the
Certainly.
way, I love the way that you tell stories. Like I could listen to this
Good.
every day, all
Uh,
day. But I
well,
also want to ask this
certainly.
question:
Sure.
how, like as a
Mm-hmm.
leader, right? Because
Right.
you are leading in that moment, right? The family, they are
Right.
depending on you. They're looking at your facial expressions.
Of
They
course.
can see a little bit of the unease, especially when you were a younger nurse and maybe didn't have the poker face. How do
Right.
you get to a place where you are comfortable enough to just stand there? Because I mean, even though we're talking
Yeah.
about the medical profession, I think the
Mm-hmm.
skills are transferable, right? So, um,
Absolutely. And I
yeah,
agree with that. And
yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
sometimes you just need to know, when to speak, when to share, when to say nothing, when
Hmm.
to listen. For me, sometimes it's just, understanding that sometimes it's saying the same thing,
Hmm.
perhaps over the course of a 12-hour day. I
Hmm.
may say the same thing 5 different times, but it's being in that space of being receptive to hear it.
Right.
And I think with anything, if you're in sales or if you're in a role where you're training someone, it's sometimes everyone learns differently.
Yes.
So sometimes I have staff that need to just come in and watch, or they'll come in and listen, or they'll come and ask me, what would I have said in this situation?
Yes.
So I think it's really understanding how different people learn and when someone is receptive to hear it. And not all the time are they ready.
Yes.
And it's being ready to receive it and saying, and being very honest. I think that's something that people appreciate. Going in and being very honest and saying they are going to pass. We have tried. This was not your fault. You've done everything that you could.
Yes.
There is no guilt.
Yes.
I need you to sit here and share your heart. They hear you. And
so
hopefully...
let me ask you this then. I'm sorry. Finish your statement
go
and then
ahead.
I'll come in. Well, here's the thing, though. I like this part about the truth. And one of the things that I have found over the last little while is that truth is no longer a thing that is as honored as I think it should be.
I agree.
And so we've mastered the art of politics. We've mastered the art of nuances so that we don't actually get to the truth. But I would imagine that in the world that you're working in, truth is a thing that it has to be there. It has to be central.
It's absolutely central. So I think, I'm talking a language that is so different to people. So we'll do a family meeting, and the physicians are wonderful, and we have a team that comes, and and everybody is on how comfortable they are. So physicians feel that some of them, their job is rule number 1, you save everybody, but they forget that really rule number 1 is that sometimes people die. And you can't change rule number 1 just because you're the physician. And it's giving the physician permission, but sometimes they come in with such a speak of medical terms that it's so overwhelming to the family that for me, I often sometimes see my role as, okay, so now the physician has spoken to you. Now I'm going to answer all those questions and break this down to you in language that makes sense. And I'll speak to their fears or say, this is what this meant, or this is what we're waiting for. And really kind of dissect it so that they can say to me at the end, thank you so much. I understand now. And I truly believe any type of knowledge is power. And my role really is to empower you to make amazing decisions. And that's how I see this. And it may be on one of the saddest days of your life, but hopefully if I can give you the tools to, not to go on with your life after you experience something, that it doesn't paralyze you, that you can use this experience as you move forward in your life.
And you've used another word, clarity. And again, I love this conversation, and I'm trying to find root in other disciplines. And the reality is, sometimes as leaders, especially when you are in a very intensive type of setting, clarity is the thing that brings the calm. The ability to take convoluted language and water it down and strain it out and bring it to its lowest common denominator without taking away the essence of what it really is. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Absolutely. And just as an aside, Andre, in another part of my life, I did run a business, and I didn't share this with you. I was a part owner in a gallery. It was a fine art gallery in Yorkville for many, many years. So I had the ability to transition from sort of saving lives during the week, and then I would go into this role where I was doing sales. And it was such a different learning about the art and the artist and the art of the deal, how to close a sale, what language to use. And it was just, but what I found that was interesting is that I think because I found it was fun and it
Mm-hmm.
was so different from my day-to-day work. So I used a lot of humor. So I remember I was chatting with a couple and I knew they were going to purchase the art. And then finally he looked at me and he said to me, Deborah, I really enjoyed chatting and you've shared all this information about the art.
Mm-hmm.
And then he looked at me and he grabbed his chest and he goes, oh my goodness, how much is this going to cost? And I said, oh my dear, in my other life,
Yes.
I said, that's why my insurance rates are so low here. I said, because if you have chest pain,
Yes.
I can resuscitate you.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
work in the intensive care. And
Yes.
he looked at me like, you don't look like a nurse. And I said, I
Right.
know, I get that a lot.
Yeah.
And it was just the humor
Mm-hmm.
of just being very open.
Yes.
There was no pressure.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to talk about the art. We walked around. And I think he enjoyed the fact that, I empowered him about the artist. He clearly, loved the piece
Yes.
and it spoke to him. And I
Yes.
think because, we have that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And then I find that sometimes we can laugh,
Mm-hmm.
even in the saddest of times.
Mm-hmm.
You can, I like to celebrate people. So I'll always say to people, tell me about your loved one,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it'll involve them coming in and having a drink or playing music or,
Mm-hmm.
or the family will sit and tell stories and laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a life well lived because it's just love.
So,
It's love.
so here's the thing, and I like
Mm-hmm.
this, right? Because one of the things that I think at times, and I'm guilty of this. At times, I know I can be really type A in terms of my
Mm-hmm.
personality. You have an
Mm-hmm.
objective, you want to get things done, you have some
Yeah,
deadlines. But what I'm hearing you say is you may sputter a little bit in the beginning as you're making these connections with people, but it helps
correct.
to kind of move things a little bit faster because I would imagine, Deborah, in your world, making connections also develops trust. And where there is trust, even if
Mm-hmm.
that loved one doesn't live, or even if that art piece doesn't go through the door, they
Right.
trust that you've given them the best that you can because of those connections.
Correct. And I think sometimes for me, it's giving people permission.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, to say, um, you did the best that you could and we tried
Mm-hmm.
and it's time now and we have to stop. And sometimes it's me saying the words that
Mm-hmm.
you cannot, they cannot get there. So
Yes.
sometimes it's simply me going in and giving someone permission to say, stop.
Mm-hmm. Stop fighting.
You're right. And
Mm-hmm.
I will, often say, please, please let your hand be the last hand holding your
Mm-hmm.
loved one. Please
Mm-hmm.
don't let it be mine. I mean, I will graciously, I will
Mm-hmm.
never allow anyone to pass alone,
Mm-hmm.
Andre,
Yeah.
that you come into the world, you're
Mm-hmm.
never alone.
That's right.
Even if so during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
if someone was going to pass, I made sure that if it was me, I
Mm-hmm.
was in the room. You
Wow.
don't go alone.
Right.
And that is, I think for me, the greatest gift that I got back through all of
Mm-hmm.
this is that no one goes alone.
Yeah.
And I've been asked, why are you sitting there?
Mm-hmm.
I just need to be here
Yeah.
until they go. Yeah.
So how
It's a gift. It's a gift for me. Believe me, I get much. Yeah. I get a lot back from that as well.
so how are you? Well, I mean, I understand, right? There's a level
Mm-hmm.
of professionalism that goes
Mm-hmm.
along with this, right? So your first day as an ICU nurse versus now, you've
Right.
gone through enough death that to some degree you are conditioned, even though you're not numb to it, on how to kind of walk through this thing because you're no longer a novice. But
I
just
think.
this, yeah, go ahead.
Right. No, I was just going to say. I think for me, what I
Mm-hmm.
also know, Andre, is that when people say to me, "Oh, this must seem like you know so familiar," and I said, "Yes, it's familiar," but for me, when this stops
Mm-hmm.
making me feel that I made a difference today, or that
Yes.
it's just another day at my job, that
Yes.
will be the day that I know it's my last day.
Oh,
I
okay.
I want to be able to still provide even
Mm-hmm.
after all these years. And
Yes.
it's not with every family. I mean, when you're running a large company, you're not going to
Yes.
connect with every person on your team. There will
Correct.
be certain people that you are really going to have that connection with
Yes.
and work well with. But I
Yes.
think that you have to find a way to still show up and suit up and be there. And for me, that's I will know when it's time to stop. I really believe that in my bones, as
So,
they say.
so you've still been able to maintain, though, a
Mm-hmm.
level of positivity, right? Because, of course, what we're talking about today is
Yes.
turning a loss into a gain.
Mm-hmm.
How do you still remain positive in the midst of trauma and death and loss and disease? As a leader, how do you
Mm-hmm.
still get there? And people are like, we can't wait till Deborah gets here because she's the light of this room. She's the light of this department.
Well, thank you for that. But a lot of the times I will come in and they'll say, the family is very difficult. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
go, oh, that will be my assignment today. Excellent.
Yeah.
Or, they're going to die. Okay, I'm going to bed 12. Alrighty then. Heidi
Yeah.
ho, off I go. And
Yes.
I understand that. But again, it's how, for me, it's, if you're looking at this in leadership, even if I didn't make the sale
Mm-hmm.
or if the patient passes, but it's how that looked. Did I do everything that I could? Did
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes for me it was um, not always like they would say to me, I'm going to go to, I will be back. And
Mm-hmm.
I always remember thinking to myself, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's not now, but
Mm-hmm.
you may get that sale or that connection in the future.
Yeah.
They need to have that information that you've given to, so for me, to a junior nurse, this is
Yes.
maybe how I would have handled the situation. This
Sure.
is maybe what I would have said to the family on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, and try to have them think of it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's what I try to impart. And yeah, it is traumatic. And as staff, I think people, there are certain, I think that's life. There are certain staff members who really don't allow people in. It's
Mm-hmm.
just too difficult.
Right.
So, but for me, I think that has always been maybe the gift, that I do allow people to come in, and I allow people, for me to have that connection with you, that heart connection.
So,
And yeah, I try to anyway.
so let me ask you this, because
Certainly.
clearly, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's picking up on this, those that are listening to this now, they are picking up on the fact that Deborah is a very transparent, open book. She may not share everything, right? Because professionally,
Mm-hmm.
it's never good to put everything on the table. But, some leaders are better at sharing more than enough while still
Right.
preserving themselves. How has your transparency as a leader helped you to be as effective as you are, whether in the art world in the past, but now definitely in the present tense in the ICU?
I think it's being vulnerable. And I know that's sort of the buzzword everybody's talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
vulnerability. But
yes.
honestly, I think it's allowing people to see. Like, I cry at work. I mean, sometimes the best advice I give, some of the nurses is, oh, honey, I can't share anything more with you. Waterproof mascara. I said,
That's
I'm
right.
like a Hallmark card. I will
Yes,
cry, and I
yes,
cry at work.
yes.
And I have stood with people and, had, been with you through days and days. And then, you know, I think it allows, you know, a wife or a daughter to say, my dad meant something to her.
Mm-hmm.
The nurse was sobbing and she
Mm-hmm.
held me and she
Yes.
cried and
Mm-hmm.
it was real. And I
Yes.
think to share that with someone,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not every family, but
Yes.
to have that heart space where you are being able to be so vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and to cry and
Yes.
still be professional, but to
Mm-hmm.
show that side of saying, I understand, I am a
Mm-hmm.
daughter, i
Yes.
am i am a mother,
Mm-hmm.
um I am a friend, I am a nurse, whatever roles that
Yes.
I've had throughout my life. And
Yes.
being able to say, I and just clearly looking, like on Sunday, I looked at this young woman and I
Mm-hmm.
said, but I see you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, sweetie, you don't need to be here when dad passes.
Mm-hmm.
You've been here every day.
Yes.
And he knew that you were.
Yes.
And you sang and you celebrated. And he
Mm-hmm.
knows.
Yes.
So even if you're not here, just at that moment, please forgive yourself.
Yeah.
You were here.
You know, if I can say this, and I hope you don't mind,
No, please.
I do believe that Markham Stouffville Hospital here in Toronto, they
Mm-hmm.
are truly blessed to have you on staff because
Thank
it
you.
sounds to me that you're not just leading with knowledge and information, you're also leading with empathy. And certainly in a world
Mm-hmm.
that is colder, that is faster, that is more
Mm-hmm.
intelligent, having
Mm-hmm.
somebody in that room with all of those machines buzzing and all those
Correct.
IVs dripping, knowing that
Right.
there is a Deborah somewhere in that room, whether she's at bed 12 or bed 2, I think there are a
Right.
lot of families that have been blessed to journey with you, whether their loved one walks out or they are rolled out. I'm sure that you have become a memorable person to so many people.
I hope so. I always laugh at families and I'll say, I can be the one that can clear the room because I'm not going to be sitting at your Christmas table.
Right.
But I certainly hope that maybe, you know, that at some point I do hope that, when they're at Christmas and
Mm-hmm.
they'll say that, they've got the place set for dad or for the grandmama or whatever they're saying and they're having a cheers or a toast or a memory.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is that maybe in that one moment they'll say, do you remember the nurse, Debra, that
Mm-hmm.
helped us to get here?
Yeah.
That it was less scary, that she made sense of it, that she allowed me to cry. She
Mm-hmm.
picked me up off the floor. She
Mm-hmm.
told me when to be frightened. She told me when I didn't need to be frightened.
Yes.
And I think with any leader, when you're getting to know your team or it's having that and really, um, you know, like you said to me at the beginning, words matter. And
Mm-hmm.
I always have, shared with my children, that words are powerful and
Yes.
they do matter. And I like to say that to, anyone that I'm mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, really think about what it is that you want to say. And sometimes it's saying nothing.
Yeah.
You don't have to come up and have a speech prepared. You just
Right.
go in and speak. You just speak, meet them where they're at.
Yes.
Sometimes they're not ready for me to go in.
That's
Sometimes
right.
they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so Deborah, I
Yes.
want I mean, we've talked about a lot and yet I feel like we haven't talked about enough. But we are kind of at the end of this conversation, and I
Not a
promise you,
problem.
we will be back to talk about some more things because I think that you sound like an incredible leader. And here's what I'd like for you to do, if you don't mind.
Not a problem.
Maybe there is a takeaway from your perspective out of this conversation that you're sharing
Hmm.
that you would like to leave us with before we finish today.
I think really, what I'd like to leave maybe, your listeners with, Andre, is just, it because my job is interesting in
Hmm.
that, there is life, but there's also this other part. And just because someone dies doesn't mean that the relationship is ever over.
Hmm.
And that is one of my absolute favorite lines, from Tuesdays with Maury. And he just said, just because someone passes never means the relationship is over. So
Hmm.
I always try to share with people, I want you to continue to look for your mom. They are going to come to you. People will say, I had a dream. That was your mom coming to you. I will have a scent, a smell. People come to me in clouds. So, for as sad as this is, it's not the end. It's just another chapter in that person's life. um, and I think it's to celebrate. What did they bring to your life to enrich your life? And what did you learn? And for me, it's that I always say that's what love feels like in that
Hmm.
moment when your heart
Hmm.
breaks. That's love.
Hmm.
That's love.
Yeah.
And for me, that's magic. If you can say I had love,
Hmm.
wow, that's a wow for me. That would be the takeaway. That you were, that you had someone in your life that you've journeyed with, and you will see them again. Is what I also know. Yeah.
Wow. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I mean that's what this conversation has felt like on my end. This is a
Good,
wow,
good.
because I think that again there are a lot of really good things about life and this planet, and
Hmm.
then there are some not so good things. But
Right.
but
But
if you
celebrate,
can,
celebrate, and
yeah,
it's sometimes it may just be that one moment, and amongst all this chaos that the world, you know, we live in. So for me, yeah, it's sad, and
yeah,
the world is sad.
yeah,
But then I look at this one moment where I look in the room, and
yes,
a man will be sitting with his wife after 60 years,
yes,
and I go, how privileged am
yes,
I to bear witness to
yes.
that kind of love
At the end of it all,
at the end of it all?
yeah,
And he said nothing.
yeah,
He simply loved her.
yeah.
And I weep. I will sit out and I go, just take a moment to look. There's so many opportunities just to look. Yeah. Look
Wow,
up from your screen.
yeah,
Yeah. Look around.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Look,
Well, this has been a pleasure
yeah, this
chatting.
has been great. Deborah, thank you so much. Deborah Coles
You're
from the ICU of Markham Stouffville Hospital. Look, one of the, for me, the takeaway is hope. I'm
hope.
listening to everything that you've said,
Right.
love and hope. So if
Hope.
you're a leader that's out there that is working in a very tough, difficult, and
Hmm.
it's not just the hospital, it's wherever you are there to be a change agent, whether in a short term or a long term. We've got to
Correct.
have hope, and we've got to find
Hmm.
a way to be empathetic, and we've got to walk with people through these experiences,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, that's what we are called to do, not just lead on the mountain, but also
Right.
to lead in the valley. So Deborah, I can't wait to have you back on. To those of you that are listening, I hope you have enjoyed these stories that are real stories. They're not downloads. This is a real person by the name of Deborah Coles. And God
Thank
bless
you.
you for all that you're doing. And may he
Well,
also, just as he
mhm.
led you into the ICU, lead you into whatever comes next. But wherever you go, I'm certain that you will be a blessing. Thank you for
You're
joining us
very
today.
welcome. Yes, and God bless to you as well and to anyone listening. It's been my pleasure to speak with you this morning.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will be back at this again next week. And if you want to have a conversation with me about this thing here, this leading with courage and empathy and hope, remember it's bstlinc21 at gmail.com. And again, take care and make every moment and minute count. Until next time.